When you hear the phrase, you have a right to an attorney, and if you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided to you, you're probably automatically thinking Miranda. But we've already discussed Miranda in part 1 of this 10-part series. And today, in part 2, you should be focusing on Gideon. Because believe it or not, until 1963, poor people were not given a lawyer in criminal proceedings. And most of these people had to defend themselves on their own without any knowledge or expertise of the law. Unsurprisingly, most of the unrepresented people were often wrongfully convicted. So today, we're looking into Gideon versus Wainwright. This is part 2 of my 10-part series called 10 Most Important Landmark Supreme Court Decisions in Criminal Law and the Myths Surrounding Them. So what I'm going to do is again give you a quick summary of the case, followed by a number of misquotations, misunderstandings surrounding the case. I call these myths. Thanks again for watching me here on YouTube. If you're new to Lawstache channel, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to lawstache.com/merch or shop.lawstache.com and check out these Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts, hats, stickers, pins, and other items. And if you put in the code 10 cases, you will receive 10% off all the merchandise. Thanks for watching.
Quick message from Lawstache. Are you charged with a crime? Or do you want to know your rights if stopped by police? Watch California attorney Anton Vieltsin discuss legal cases from the Supreme Court, Ninth Circuit, and California state courts on the Lawstache YouTube page. Anton has handled hundreds of federal and state criminal cases, has an in-depth knowledge of the law, and has the best mustache ever. Subscribe to the Lawstache YouTube page. That's Lawstache.
Today we're discussing a landmark Supreme Court decision, Gideon versus Wainwright. Mr. Clarence Gideon was charged with essentially breaking and entering into a pool hall in Florida. At his first appearance in court, he asks for a lawyer to be appointed to his case. But his request is denied. The court says that only individuals who are charged with capital offenses in Florida receive a free lawyer, and Mr. Gideon would not get one. He gets convicted of the crime and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But he doesn't let off a fight and continues to appeal his case all the way up to the Supreme Court, essentially arguing that he should have received representation. In Supreme Court, the justices agree with Mr. Gideon. They say that individuals who are charged with felony offenses in state court should receive a free lawyer if they can't afford one. So that's essentially Gideon versus Wainwright. It guarantees a right to a lawyer for indigent individuals in state felony proceedings. Which brings me to myth number 1. Gideon gave everybody a free lawyer in all cases. That is not true. As I just mentioned, Gideon only guarantees a free lawyer in felony offenses. It excludes all misdemeanor offenses. And even today, many proceedings, you don't get a free lawyer. For example, divorce, child custody, evictions. Most of your civil cases, if not all of them, you don't get a free lawyer. And even immigration proceedings, where you could potentially be deported, an individual does not get a free lawyer in immigration proceedings. Myth number 2. The case created the right to counsel. That is not true. Of course, your right to counsel comes from the 6th Amendment. But the 6th Amendment applied only to federal proceedings. It did not apply to state proceedings. What Gideon said is that the right to counsel does apply to state proceedings through the 14th Amendment. Myth number 2, or number 3 now. The lawyer is always free. I urge you to watch an episode that was produced by John Oliver talking about public defenders and how the system works in many different states. I will tell you the free lawyer is not always free. In fact, some states ask for you to then reimburse the state after the case. So try to understand the system that you're working in, because again, if you're poor, you might not always be getting a free lawyer. You might be getting one in appearance, but at the end, you will be paying for one. So again, some of the states, in fact, undermine the decision in Gideon because you end up paying for the lawyer. Myth number 4. Gideon was the first case to challenge denial of counsel. That is not true. Of course, in Powell versus Alabama, the Supreme Court said that the state has to provide a free lawyer in capital cases. And then we have the case Betts. Betts versus Brady. In Betts, the Supreme Court said that the states only need to provide counsel under special circumstances. Well, in fact, Gideon overturns Betts and says and restores that everybody in state felony proceedings should receive a free lawyer if they're indigent. Myth number 5. Gideon guarantees effective lawyers. That is not true. Unfortunately, that's not true. Gideon always says that you should get a lawyer in state felony proceedings. It doesn't mean that you're going to get a good one. So again, because you don't get to choose your lawyer, you end up getting whoever is assigned. So you can't go in front of the judge and say, you know what, I don't like that particular lawyer. Can you assign this other one to me because I've heard good things about this person? Well, that's not how that works. You get a free lawyer, not a free lawyer of your choosing. Myth number 6. Public defenders put everyone on equal footing with hired lawyers. Again, unfortunately, this is not true. And again, maybe watch the production by John Oliver about public defenders. I'm not saying that these individuals are not skilled and don't know the law. Many of them are very good lawyers. Unfortunately, the public defenders' offices across the country are often underfunded and overworked. And so you might be part of many hundreds of cases that your lawyer is handling. And so there's just not enough time for that particular lawyer to focus on your case. And that's why many individuals end up hiring their own counsel. Myth number 7. Gideon got off on a technicality. This is not true at all. In fact, after the Supreme Court ruled in the case, it was returned to Florida, and Gideon went in front of the jury again. And he was in fact acquitted of the crime, which proves that having good representation, having the knowledge of the law, having the expertise, and of course, most importantly, having somebody there next to you to fight on your behalf who knows the system, knows how to present proper legal argument, changes everything. And so, in fact, this was not a technicality. Mr. Gideon was acquitted of the crime. Myth number 8. The decision was controversial and closely divided. That is not true at all. In fact, Gideon is a 9-0 decision. All 9 justices joined together. And in fact, some of those justices changed their opinion from Betts. Remember, in Betts, it was that the state only had to give a lawyer in special circumstances. And now the same justices, or at least some of them, changed their opinion and overturned Betts. And so all 9 justices said that you do get a lawyer in all state felony proceedings. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit more about Gideon and your 6th Amendment right to counsel. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to Lawstache channel, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to lawstache.com/merch and check out these Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. And once again, if you put in the code 10cases, you will receive 10% off all the merchandise. Thanks for watching.